Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Matt Hendricks. I'm the founder of Perspective Data Science. And today I'm going to do a deep dive into a school that recently announced it was closing. It's the College of St. Rose in New York. And so I like to do this. The motivation for this video is pretty simple, to try to learn what we can from schools that ultimately close. Well, I guess what I'm really interested in is knowing what it looks like when a school is in trouble. Although I've been doing this for a while now, I got a good sense, and I'll show you what it looks like as well. So I want to try to spread the word on what the warning signs are, and then also learn if there might be things that we can do to prevent the school from closing, or early warning signs where we can intervene. And you'll see that a lot of early warning signs in the case of College of St. Rose, as well as potentially some things they could have done maybe a year or two ago, and potentially righted the ship. There's also something that I cannot explain in the data that you'll see is really interesting. The College of St. Rose lost 62% of its applications in the last 2 years of its life. Basically, I've never seen that before. Right? I've seen something similar with the Mills College losing half of its applications in 1 year and then never getting them back for like 5 straight years until they closed or merged. But this is even worse. This is 62% in a 2-year span. Right at the end, when they really had no leeway. You'll see when we look at the financials. So I think there's some lessons to draw from this. There's also unanswered questions. I can't explain how a school can lose 62% of its applications in such a short period of time, and I'll talk more about that when we get in there. All right, so this is the outline of the video. I just gave you the motivation, but part of the motivation too is I want to study the College of St. Rose, because College of St. Rose is quite a bit bigger than most of the schools we see that are closing. There's like dozens of schools that have closed that are around 500-600 students, which that's pretty understandable. But the College of St. Rose looks quite a bit different in that it had over 2,000 students, and it had such a dramatic turn of events right at the end. So it's really interesting to me to study this case and to maybe get more information from people in the community to figure out how can they lose so many applications so quickly, without any obvious things that I can see that have had changed. Although I just found one that I'll bring up in the video and see maybe if that is shedding some light on to what happened. Okay. So yeah, this is an interesting case to study just because it's bigger, and you don't really see a lot of schools with 2,000 plus students closing abruptly. So yeah, let's see what we can learn. So what I did here is I made one of our dashboards that we always build for the schools that we work with, and these dashboards are quite comprehensive. They cover basically everything that we can, from IPEDS, from the audited financial statements, and from the 990s, and then other data that I scraped and pulled in, like data from the Common App. And so they're pretty comprehensive. So I'm not gonna have time in this video to go through everything, but I'll pull out the things that I think are the most interesting, as I mentioned. So I'm gonna focus just on so their financials initially. This school has been struggling financially for a long time, and I'll show you what that looks like. Of course, it got much worse in 2023, and I'll show you why that was the case and how they actually paid the bills for that year. But it's not; they haven't really been sustainable for a long time. The reason they're struggling financially is that they have really both problems, right? They have high costs and low revenues compared to what you would expect for a school like College of St. Rose. On the cost side, they have really high operational plant costs, like maintenance costs for the buildings, which is interesting. It could be, I mean, even when they were full size, their costs for maintenance were high. But when the school's shrinking, a lot of times what happens when the school shrinks is they still have the buildings, but they just don't have as many students paying for the maintenance and stuff like that, right? So when I'm projecting an expected cost, it's usually based on the size of the school in terms of enrollment. So in some sense, it's understandable that they would have high maintenance costs since they've been shrinking. But even before they started shrinking a lot, those maintenance costs seem quite high. Another thing they have is overstaffing. So they actually have like the worst combination, in my opinion, of staffing mix. They have high numbers of staff in several areas that I'll point out, and then combined with basically low salaries across the board. So you typically get in that environment high turnover rates, low morale, low productivity, just generally unhappy workforce. That's not funny, but it's an equilibrium that we see a lot with struggling schools. They seem to not want to right-size the number of staff and will just hold salaries low for a long time to balance, because they have no other choice, really. But it's a really bad idea, right? You end up with an expensive payroll anyway because you have so many people, and they're unhappy on top of it. So it's really a double whammy. So I'll show you some evidence of overstaffing and where those areas were. They might have done something about that several years ago and balanced the budget before this crisis with 62% loss of applications. So their revenues are also low, and I think that's mostly explained by a change in their net price recently. Clearly, they're trying to attract more students. It didn't work. It usually doesn't work, actually, to reduce the price. A lot of times, schools want to reduce the price to try to attract, get their yield rate up, attract more students, and it usually doesn't work, right? Unless the school is really expensive to begin with. I don't see it working very often, right? There are some cases where the school is like really expensive and maybe they didn't realize that, and their yield rate is low because of that. And in that case, I think it makes quite a bit of sense to reduce your price or at least experiment with that. But at least in this case, they significantly reduced the price, and we don't see really a change at all in their yield rate or their enrollment. So clearly it wasn't the problem. And then the big thing I'm going to show you is their issue with their applications just falling off the map. And we'll talk about that and see what we can learn and take away from this case. Okay, so let's get started. First with the financials. Okay, so this on the dashboard, I have this key financials and ratios page. And the most important variable is net operating income. I'll show you what that is on the audit. So this is a number that comes from the audit, basically, and I've standardized it so you can compare it across schools for all sorts of different revenue and cost types, right? So I put it on a percentage basis so that we can compare big schools to little schools, even though this is a dashboard that has similar schools by the peer set anyway. By the way, I should back up a little bit. I have another video that explains how I create these peer sets. So this peer set is created using a machine learning algorithm that selects schools based on how similar they are to the College of St. Rose. That's how this peer set was created. And so everything I'm going to do is going to be based on the full set of peers that are in this. But the cool thing about dashboard is you can take peers out. This is really the power of a dashboard. If you've got like a conversation going on and say somebody doesn't think, St. Xavier is a good peer for the College of St. Rose, you can just take them out, right? And just drop them out. Or select any subset you want and see how sensitive the results are to that peer set. But I'm not going to do that in this video. I don't have time for that. All right, so what you want here for net operating income, let me show you where this number comes from first. So I have this is one of their audits. This is the 2023 audit. And the most important number to get financial health, in my opinion and most people's opinion, I would say, is you want to get this operating incomes. It's usually called the change in net assets from operating activities or from operations. And that is this number that I highlighted right here for, let's see if I can zoom in, highlighted right here for 2023. All right, importantly, I'm selecting the without restrictions. So this is unrestricted revenues, subtracting the cost of operating, all right? So why do I focus on unrestricted? That just gives a better sense, a clearer view of the money that the school has to actually spend on operations. If you have if you focus on like total, for example, you're going to have some revenues that are restricted, meaning that it can't be used this year or maybe next year. They have to use for a specific purpose that kind of muddies the calculus in terms of how financially healthy the institution is. So I focus on this number. It's simply taking the operating revenues without restrictions and subtracting the operating expenses, and you get negative 16 million in this case. And this is when things really went pear-shaped for College of St. Rose in 2023. Although they had always had negative numbers here, going back as far as I can see. So I can't select that for some reason, but you can see in 2022 they had a negative 5.8 million. In 2023 it was negative 16 million. All right, so I pull these numbers with an AI. I have another video on that, actually, an AI that will scrape these audits and pull the numbers into a database for me, and I pull those numbers into the dashboard. All right, so let me show you what this should look like versus what it actually does look like for St. Rose. Okay, so what it should look like typically is close to what the peer set has here. Actually, so I need to select, I'm just messing with the years here to get the biggest number of peers in here. So I have 28 peers in this blue line here. And you can see the peer set is always positive, right? And that's the way that schools are typically run, right? Most schools are not dying, believe it or not. So the average school is doing quite well, and they're having positive net operating income. That change in net assets from operations, that unrestricted column, is typically positive for the typical school. In fact, it's usually about 1.5% on a percentage basis. So like I said, I normalize this number. So I take change in net assets from operations and divide by operating revenue, that top number in the audit. And when you express it in a percentage basis like that, the typical value is anywhere from like 1% to 5 or 6% is sort of the normal range. It kind of depends on what kind of school you are, but like bigger schools would typically have a little bit bigger cushion, smaller schools, smaller, but usually not negative. All right, and you can see College of St. Rose is always negative, negative 6%, negative 5, negative 5, negative 14%, negative 3, and so on. And then if you bring in this final year, 2023, before they announced closure, they announced their closing, by the way, right after this fiscal year in December of 2023, which should have been like 5 or 6 months after these numbers came out. All right, so five or 6, maybe 4 months after, maybe actually only 3 months after they have these numbers. It takes a while for the auditors to get this done. So they're at negative 35% in 2023, and that's when they decided to close. All right, but honestly, all of these are terrible, right? They need to be positive, all right? And this is one of the lessons we can learn from this. Schools can't operate this way. It's not sustainable. Even if this drop here didn't happen, eventually this is going to they're going to have to come to terms with this. And I'll show you why on the audit. Basically what it means when you're negative here is obviously your costs are higher than your expenses, but some of these costs are deferred, and eventually you got to pay them, right? Like some of it's depreciations, your buildings are like crumbling or whatever, you're not paying for them. Eventually you're going to have to pay, all right? And that's sort of where this school is headed. But it happened more abruptly than that, because you can see if we go back to the audit here in 2023, a very significant thing happened. Even though their change in net assets from operations were always negative, they still had a positive net cash from operating activities and the reason for that is basically here. There are some expenses, as I just mentioned, that are not cash expenses, at least not today, right? So like depreciation on equipment and buildings, you don't have to pay that out of pocket today, but eventually you got to replace that equipment, and you have to pay eventually, or rebuild buildings or something like that. So there is that cost, but that's in the accounting, but it's not something they had to pay in 2022. So you sort of kick the can down the road with it. So since it's a non-cash expense, it's added back into the cash flow. So actually, if you look at their 2022 year, even though it was quite bad in terms of having a negative net income, they were actually able to pay the bills because 7 million of their loss, which is bigger than their change in net assets from operation loss, it was non-cash expense. That changed quite a bit though in 2023, where their loss was, I think it was 16 million, right? That's quite a bit bigger than their depreciation expense. So they had an 8 million cash deficit in 2023, which means they couldn't pay payroll, they couldn't pay their debt from operating activities. They have to get the cash from somewhere else, and you can see where they got the cash. There's other ways you can generate cash for your business or for your school. One is by borrowing, which is not really what they did here. Borrowing activity would be in net cash from financing activities, so they didn't do that. You can see here there would be proceeds on long-term debt. There would be a big number here, and then this would be a big number as well, net cash from financing. That's not what they did to pay their bills. You can see what they did. They got 8.5 million here. And what this was basically is, you can see every year schools are purchasing, there's moving money around in their investment accounts, right? They're purchasing stocks, selling stocks, and so on. You can see typically it balances pretty closely for them, but this year did not. They pulled out about 10 million in cash out of investments here. And you can see what they did actually if we go down to the endowment. I'll just search for it, endowment net. Yep, you can see there's an endowment statement down in the notes. And I don't want to get into the weeds too much, but this is really interesting. They pulled out $11 million out of their unrestricted endowment to cover the cash deficit. So clearly, that's a very desperate thing to do, right? I mean, and they can only do it once, really. You see how much they have left after they did that? They took 11 this year, and they have 10.5 left. So they really could only do this one more time, all right? And so I suppose they figured in December of 2023 that they were probably going to have to do this again, and it probably still wasn't going to be enough, given the trajectory that they were on. It was going to take actually probably several years of doing this, pulling from investments to support operations until they could right the ship with the enrollment funnel, if they even could. So that's what happened in a nutshell financially. All right, so big red flag if you see a school that's running negative numbers here consistently. There's lots of problems with that, right? The board should not be allowing the school to run here, for one, and at least not for an extended period of time. So lots of questions should be asked as to why this was allowed to happen. And I'll show you what they could have done to get this back to sustainable in a minute. All right. Actually, I'll do it right now. Let's take a look at their expenses. All right, so remember the deficit prior to the big drop here was like 5 or 6 million. And if you take a look at their spending, it's pretty much, I mean, they had issues on both the revenue and cost side, but basically their expenses were 6 million higher than you expected. And you can see that here from this table. This table does a lot in the background, and I'll show you where this number comes from. So you see their fiscal year 2022 spending was actually 66 million, but that should have been about 60 million given their size and revenue. And I'll show you where that number comes from. It comes from actually a simple regression. Actually, not a simple regression, a regression of total expenses on number of students and total operating revenues. All right, so this is a cool little graph. The plane that you see here, that is the regression plane. All right, that's the fitted regression plane. And so that incorporates all the points that you would expect a school, all the combinations of size, revenue, and the expected expenses given their size and revenue. So you can see the red dots are College of St. Rose. And I mean, they used to be fairly close up here. In 2020, their total expenses were 74 million and their operating revenue was 73. Predicted spending was 72. So they're only like a 2 million over expected there. But things got way out of hand by the time we get to 2023. And I hope you can see that if you just take a look at this red dot kind of out in no man's land here. That's their last year, okay? This is, their operating revenue was 47 million. Total expenses were 63 actual, and their predicted value back down on the, if you know, I'll just do a little picture here to show you. If we took this dot, I think it was this one, right? And put it back down onto the plane, that would be the gap here, and their spending over expectation. So the gap here between the dot and the plane, the expected value is 6 million. Actually, if the 2022 one is 6 million, the 23 is way higher. So the one that was up in the table is this one. So their operating revenue was 60, their total actual expenses were 66 million, and their predicted spending was 60.5. So about 6 million higher than expected. So that's how you see that. Simple, it's multiple regression analysis inside the peer set. Okay, so the question is, where are they high? And we can repeat that analysis for all of the different functional expenses. And so you can see where they're high. There's high on instruction spending by 4.2 million. They're high on institutional support by 2.3 million. And they're high on auxiliary enterprises by 2 million. All right, so we're gonna dig more into like where that is. It turns out some of this is in staffing, although it doesn't really show up here. It's kind of interesting. Usually you'll see high spending on salaries and wages and benefits in this case. But it's interesting thing that's happening at College of St. Rose is they have like, it's canceling out a little bit. They have a lot of staff, low pay, and not very many part-time staff. So in the end, they're not spending like a whole lot on staffing, but it's just a really inefficient, in my view, labor setup. All right, so I think that there is actually a way they could have saved quite a bit of money and still got everything done on the staffing side. But here's one of the things I highlighted earlier too. Their spending on operation and maintenance of plant is really high compared to expected. And again, the calculation is the same. I'll show you this in the graph below again. I'll go down to this multiple regression analysis, pull in maintenance of plant. All right, and set this up. So we've got maintenance of plant on this axis, operating revenues here, students here, and you can see again they're way above the plane here on these. Their actual spending on maintenance of plant is like 11 million, and their predicted spending is 5. So they're about 6 million high just on maintenance and operating the plant, which is really interesting. I can't explain that. I can't really dig into that very much. So what would need to happen, what I usually do with these is just, highlight. These are questions we need to ask, right? And dig into the data, into the institutional data, and figure out why is spending so high in that area, other ways to bring it down. Some of it could be really high staffing in like maintenance areas, and I think that actually could be that. It's really hard to explain because they're supposed to have the maintenance staff accounted for in salaries and wages, but it's possible that somehow it wasn't. There's lots of questions to ask here. It could be that there's missing contractors. Generally, it's going to be more efficient to have contractors run your maintenance rather than doing it in-house. There's lots of different questions to ask and things to dig into on this. But right now, I'm just going to have to leave it. I know that operation and maintenance of plant is high, much higher than normal, almost double. And but I can't explain why. I don't know what's all happening on that side, but you could dig in, right? I'm doing an outside-in analysis here, right? I can't answer everything, but I can tell you where to look. At least have a good idea of where to look. All right, so that's on the expense side. So actually not all of the expense side. So I'm gonna dig into the staffing here and just show you what I was telling you about earlier. Their staffing numbers have always been quite high, and but their pay is really low, all right? So in the end, it kind of washes out. All right, so they have 280 full-time staff, non-instructional staff. For a school of their size and revenue, they should have about 196 full-time staff, and their pay should be about 77,000, and it's only 69,000. So if you were to like right size of this by pulling the numbers down to 196 and bring the staff salaries up to an average of 77,000, you would still save $4.2 million. And that's why I'm saying that there could have been a lot they could have done here. Remember, the deficit was only, it was only 6 million. So this gets you almost all the way there. And if you investigate the operation of the plant, and there's probably another couple million there at least, maybe a lot more. So there's a lot of questions to ask here as to why do we have such high numbers and where are they? And this table will also help us figure out where those numbers are. And the analysis is the same as before. I've got that regression analysis I'll show you in a second, but one of the areas they're high is upper admin, right? You have upper administrators in SOC code 11, and you also have them in SOC 13. These are like the business office folks here, typically loading up into institutional support. And remember, the institutional support spending was high, so this could be part of the reason that's high. And combined, again, raising the salaries of the upper admin and bringing the numbers right, you'd still save almost $2 million. They have, looks like their IT staff might be higher than normal, but there's more than potentially IT in here. There could be some research staff, but I did see that their research spending was 0, so this may be just IT and maybe inefficient IT at that. So again, there's another $500,000 or so there. There's some others that are high, but there's one that's really high, and that's this one. So they have 77. They should have about 29 service staff. All right. And so service staff, there's a lot of different staff occupations lumped into this. There's SOC 31, 33, 35, 37, 39. And I'll just show you some of those. So 31, it was 31 in there? Yeah, 31, 33, 35. So these are the SOC codes. Let me zoom this in so you can see a little better. So 31 is healthcare support occupations. That could be like student health services staff. So you want to check that. That could be one of the areas that they're high. 33 is campus security. You definitely want to check that. I've seen that many times before where for whatever reason, campus security personnel just gets super out of control. In fact, at my old institution, that was the case. 35 is interesting. Food preparation and serving related occupations. So if the school has an in-house food service situation, it tends to be really high in 35, and it's usually quite inefficient. You should look into what it would be if the alternative is to outsource your food service. And they are doing that. So I don't think it's that one. So I'd be more inclined to think that it's going to be either the security personnel or 37 is in there as well. And we already mentioned that maintenance of plant was really high, right? 37 and 39. Both of those are related to maintenance. Actually, no, one of them. 37 is building and grounds crew, cleaning, maintenance occupations. So I suspect that that's also going to be high. You just want to check that, right? How many groundskeeping folks do we have? Do we have too many? Do we not need that? Especially a school that's struggling financially, that's like the first thing that you might look into cutting. The furthest away from the mission, the better, right? Cut those things that aren't really crucial to get the mission complete. All right. So those are the places you'd want to look. Another place is there's some places they're low, right? Like office support staff, quite low. And the pay for office support staff is quite low. So, I mean, what I'm showing here is actually adjusting some of these higher, adjusting some lower, significantly increasing the pay, and you still save 4.2 million. So I'm convinced there's a lot they could have done to optimize their workforce and actually get better outcomes and save a ton of money. All right. So that's non-instructional full-time staff. Here's full-time faculty. I didn't show you in the graph. Let me show you in the graph one of these. So where am I getting these numbers again? Let's take a look at service personnel. Whoops. All right, let's go to service personnel. And again, you can see the red dots. are just way out in no man's land here, all right? Almost off the graph. They're just really, really high, and the other dots are the other schools, right? And this axis this is the code. This is the number of service staff that they have. Even in 2023, when they're about to close, they still have 77 people in this group, and they should have about 26 or so. All right, it's quite high. So that's potentially low-hanging fruit there. All right, so that's how you see that. Okay, so I'll speed this up a little bit and show you the faculty is a similar story, but not nearly as bad as not nearly as off expectation as the full-time staff. They have 118 full-time faculty, and they should have about 95 for their size. But honestly, a lot of that is because the school is just shrinking quickly, or this is for 2023, right after things have really kind of got out of hand with enrollment. But you can see again, if we look at the faculty size here, it usually is, let me make sure I've got the right axis here. It's usually above the plane, right? Always a bit higher than the expected value would be for a school with their number of students and their revenue. All right, and so the last read, I'll show you if I can get it highlighted here. 118 was their last read on full-time faculty, and the predicted value is 99. It's a little bit different from my table above, because I think the table above I just selected the last few years, so I'll show you that. So 118 versus 93.5. So yeah, pretty close. I think I actually selected one more year, but you got the idea. A little high on faculty, and again, there's another 2 million or so. If you right size both the pay and the number of faculty, in theory, you could come out the other end with a 2 million savings on your budget. All right, one quick thing. Another thing, that the reason why their overall payroll costs are low is that they're just really low on part-time staff. So there's probably lots of opportunities here, there were, to increase part-time staffing and substitute some part-time staffing for the full-time and save money that way as well. All right, but these are things that, school's closed now, but they could have looked into this years ago and perhaps gotten to a balanced budget and gotten onto a sustainable path before things really got bad. And it could have started them on a completely different path. We don't know. I don't know, at least. They might have done something dramatic in the last couple of years, right? Or maybe they're so pessimistic that they couldn't fix the enrollment issue that, they just sort of gave up at the end. But if you get to a sustainable path before that, maybe then they're inclined to kind of weather the storm. Maybe they're in a situation where they could weather it for a few years and figure out why their applications fell out 62% and, just reverse whatever they did to cause that. So let's take a look. So I'll make sure I stay on track here. I did want to show you, so that's the cost side. The revenue side is not great. I'll show you that as well. I don't want this video to go too long like all of my videos do, but this is it. This is fun. So let's take a look at revenues. There we go. It was taking a little bit there. All right, similar analysis here, a lot of regression analysis. Again, their actual revenue in fiscal year 2022, operating revenue from the audit was 60.4. Their expected value for their size is 72 million. So they're quite low on their overall revenue. Why is it low? Well, mainly because their net tuition and fee revenue is low for their size, which means their price is too low usually. Or it could be that they have like lower income students, or they don't have a lot of international students or something like that, and their peers do, but that's not the case here. It is low, but their peers don't have international students either. And so really the issue here is the price, and I'll show you that. Their auxiliary enterprise revenue looks pretty good, just a little low. I believe when I looked at that, it was mostly that they have less housing than you would expect, but otherwise everything else looked fine. So let's take a look at net price. So the reason their net tuition and fee revenue is low is mostly explained by this table, right? Similar again, this is all from regression analysis, but basically their prices are lower, right? And it wasn't always the case. Their price for Title IV kids, students with 110,000 of family income or higher is quite a bit lower than what their peers are charging. And that's what's giving them the lower net tuition revenue for the most part. I mean, it wasn't the case. So you see their peer set. This is pretty normal, right? Like, there's inflation and everything, right? So everybody's net price is gradually increasing. Okay. There's a lot of people that like focus in on like discounting and stuff like that. It doesn't matter. Discounting's gone up too, but at the end of the day, the net price, the price they pay after the discount, is still going up. All right, for the average school. And so but that's not the case at St. Rose. They were in this path of reducing net price, with continuing to increase the discount faster than they were increasing the sticker price. So you get this case where your net price goes down, and as a result, your net tuition revenue is going to suffer. You know, you might think, okay, well, maybe they got some benefit out of this in that their yield rate was higher or something like that, but it didn't, not that I could see, it didn't help. So generally, it's not a good idea to do that. Generally, a better idea to stick your price as close to your competitors as possible. And you can only really do that through benchmarking. Okay, let's see, our peers even, not even your competitors. And then make small tweaks if you need to, but usually you're better off focusing in on other strategies like getting your funnel bigger at the beginning, making it easier to apply, marketing, things like that. All right, so let's go back and take a look here. Now here's the most important part of this video, right? So this is the part that I can't explain, but I am shocked when I saw it. So large enrollment losses. I'll just start you guys right at the simulator. So this is a simulator. The red line is my model that projects future enrollments given all of their funnel parameters, right? So the funnel has the number of applications, the number of transfer students, the percentage of applicants that are accepted for admission, or at the admit rate, the yield rate, which is the percentage of admitted students that ultimately enroll, and then the retention rates, all right? And then I do some projections to figure out graduation rates and stuff like that, but at the end of the day, my model is really good. You can see the actual enrollment of undergraduate students is the blue line, and my red line is sort of overlapping over, what do we call that again? Back tested, all right? So it's back tested against the actuals, and it's really accurate, right? My red model is predicting what's happening almost perfectly, even though it's not using the real numbers, right? It's just using the funnel parameters. All right, so the cool thing about having this model is we can project out where the future enrollment's gonna be given the current parameters. And you can see right when they closed the doors, they were still looking at several years of declining enrollment given the current situation. So the reason I'm starting here is I want to show you what would happen if they did fix some of their parameters, and you can see what's the most important parameters to fix. So a lot of schools like to focus in on this yield rate, and let me just show you, if they were to increase their yield rate to the highest ever they've ever had, it doesn't really affect very much their overall enrollment. It's unfortunate that my face is there. There we go. It doesn't affect their overall enrollment. Even if they got to their 19% yield rate, which is decent, it's not going to make a difference. Even if they got to like 30%, it's not going to make a difference. The big driver here, if I went back to where they were in 2023, right there at 12.5%. Well, let's take a look. If they admitted a higher percentage, still that's not really going to help either. All right, you see where I'm going with this? If they got more transfer students, say they got record number of transfers, it helps a little bit more than the other two actually. You see a little bit of a rebound here on their future enrollment. But ultimately, I think you see where I'm going with this. Oh, you can mess with your retention too. If they got their retention up to almost 100%, still not going to matter, all right? Very small bounce. What matters is that they get this application number back up. This is atrocious application number here for their own history. Just a few years ago, this is 2023 at 2,500 apps. 2022 at 4,500 apps was terrible. They're usually around 6,000, almost 7,000 apps. All right, if they get back to that, 6,500 apps, things go back to nearly normal. Just by 2027, right? So the biggest issue you can see here, the biggest lever that they have is the biggest problem they had was their applications just fell off the map. So there's a couple things they could have done if they just got their applications back to normal, and say you get your transfer students back up to 180 or so, and there you go, you're back in business right where you were back in like 2018 in terms of enrollment. It takes a while though. It takes a while. All these small classes have to graduate, and then you bring in the bigger freshman classes every year to replace them, and eventually you get back to your 2,500 students or so. But that was going to take a while. And remember, they only had 10 million left in their unrestricted endowment, so they just didn't have the time, unless they got a big loan and can convince somebody to give them a loan to basically pay the bills for a few years to get back to the sustainable enrollment. It's not going to happen. All right, so let me show you the in the enrollment page what happened here, and this is just shocking, the number of applications and what happened. So their applications look quite good for a while, and then all of a sudden in 2020 they lose. I believe this was like a 27% loss or so. I can actually give you the real number. From 21 to 22, applications decreased by 29%, and then from 21 to 23, it's down 61.5%, almost 62%. So that's a huge drop. And there are a number of things that I thought could have happened, and it turned out none of them were the explanation. One thing I thought is maybe they dropped out of the Common App. Another thing I thought, maybe they weren't test optional or something like that, or they added a writing requirement or something and made it more difficult to apply. Maybe they increased their application fee. None of those were true. They were still in the Common App. For what I can tell, what I can see, it looked like they were test optional. Nothing there seemed to explain this massive drop in applications. And so I can't really explain it, but I did find something that was interesting right before I started recording this. If you look at their contractor usage, and that's one of the things I didn't show you. I have it in the dashboard, but contractor usage is actually pretty good here. But there's an interesting thing that happens with their contractors right when this application drop happens. So let me get to it. Okay, here we go. So take a look. Their contractors here, they have this. What year is this? This is 2020. Okay, you see here they have EAB as a contractor. EAB is a contractor that would be focused, I'm assuming, on helping their application numbers, they're helping their enrollment. That's what EAB typically does. And this is 2020. So this is the fiscal year 2020. This would have been the last year that they had one more year of good applications after this. Okay. So let's take a look at the year where it gets. So here's what happens. So I don't delay it, but basically what I found is in 2021 they still had EAB, but only half the pay. And there's this other contractor that comes on that does marketing. All right, so it looked to me like they're swapping out EAB for a different marketing company right when this cratering happens. Could be a coincidence, but definitely something that I would look at. It could be that switching from EAB to a different marketing contractor is what led to the drop off in applications and the cratering of the freshman classes. So I can show you that in By the way, I'm giving you guys all access to this dashboard so you can take a look for yourself. But here's the 990 in 2021. I think this is when I can show you what happens here. There's a transition to a different marketing firm, and EAB's pay is cut in half. Yeah, EAB's pay is 360, which it was over a million, right? And then there's a new contractor that comes on called Elevation 10,000. They said web hosting, but I looked on their website and they're a marketing company. So it's possible, I could be totally wrong, but it's possible that there was a transition here, because you can see also in the 990 for 2022, EAB is gone. Now, I'm not like a big fan of EAB or anything, but it could explain what we see, right? EAB is totally off of the list now, and Elevation 10,000 is there, right? It looks like they fired EAB, and that may have had negative consequences for their applications, severe consequences, but which is kind of shocking, because it's not, as far as I understand it, they could continue the same policies that EAB had implemented, but maybe they went in a different direction. Okay. Right, so this video is already pretty long, so I think I'll leave it at that. So you can see some of the capabilities that you have with benchmarking, some of the tools that we create. You can see the contractors. I think I've got everything in there. But yeah, I think the key takeaways here, don't let, if you're a school, every school should be constantly checking their finances. Everybody, even if you're a faculty member, if you're a student, even any kind of stakeholder should take a look. If the school's running deficits, ask questions. Why are we allowing that to happen? I mean, it can happen from time to time just by accident, right? But if it's happening every year, that's a problem in terms of just leadership, in my opinion. And it basically means that nobody's asking questions, right? And making the institution financially viable. So don't let it happen. Schools should be constantly checking their staffing numbers versus the right size, the expected size for their revenues and their enrollment, right? Just like any business, when a business grows, they hire more people, right? When a business shrinks, they fire people. That's how it should happen in higher ed as well. And it's really not, I've seen several people say labor costs are fixed. I don't know where that came from. Labor costs are not fixed. In fact, is the least fixed cost almost on the expense sheet. So they're not fixed, they're variable. So these are things that need to be checked and adjusted as the school grows or shrinks. Check your pricing strategy, right? If your price is lower than every other school that you would compare yourself to, ask questions. Why? There's probably a diminishing return just to being the lowest, right? Once you're lower than everybody else, it probably doesn't matter if you're way lower. And you're probably giving up a lot of revenue in that sense as well. Ask questions like, why was it reduced to begin with, right? And when they did reduce it, you can check actually on the dashboard. When they have sharp reductions in the price, did anything happen to their yield rate, applications, anything like that? And you can get a sense of whether the students are sensitive to the price or not, right? You got your own data, your own really natural experiments to check it. All right, and the last thing I'm going to leave you with is just this question. I still don't know how you can lose 62% of your applications in just 2 admission cycles, especially since with still being on the Common App, being test optional. It seems like even if you do nothing, you should still get a lot of applications, right? It's really easy to click in the Common App and send apps off. So I'm really curious to understand how that could happen, what happened to make the apps fall so quickly. All right, so thank you for watching. Leave any comments. If you have any ideas, leave them in the comments section. I'm going to make more videos like this as I have time. It's really interesting to study schools that fail, and it's our responsibility to do it as well. We have to learn from any mistakes that were made. Not necessarily mistakes were made, but sometimes schools close just because they're not really viable, right? They only have a few hundred students. They don't have any donor support or something like that. I don't think that was the case in St. Rose's case. They had a decent sized endowment at one point. They just went with deficits for a long time, and then an inexplicable loss of applicants. So, but I could be wrong. Let me know. Let me know what you think about the applications, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.